Back when I was in high school, if it was around maybe 2013, and I was on my sophomore year of high school. And in other words, I took this gym class, which, of course, I knew a bunch of people who were taking the gym class. We had at least a really awesome teacher who would take us for walks in the forest, to the park, and one time he even treated us at slushies. However, it was close to when exams were coming up, and since I didn't have exams at the time, I was with my class and we were going on this one hike in the woods. While we were hiking in the woods, we were so far ahead of the teachers, they didn't even recognize us kids were gone. Of course, we ended up going down this one path, which I found it to be pretty interesting. Of course, some dogs and some people who walk them, would pass by, and sometimes some people on dirt bikes would pass, as we did have some dirt biking paths. However, we looked over to see that there was someone or something looking at us. At first, one of my friends named Morgan said she pointed out someone or something standing in the middle of what seemed to be a bridge. It was like one of those little bridges that was not far, and underneath of it was a stream. It didn't look like a bear as we thought, but it did look like it was wearing a hoodie. We looked to see that this person was in barefoot, and we were quite concerned or confused as to why somebody barefoot would be around there. Morgan ended up asking him, but he didn't say anything. He was looking up what seemed to be the sky. He had his back turned to us, and this is when things got a little weird. We looked around, but we couldn't find anybody or someone who he's associated with. We ended up going to our teachers, and our teacher says we should go the other trail. I looked back and still stared at the man in the figure that was on the bridge for at least a good few seconds until he disappeared as I walked by. Obviously, this was reported to the authorities and the police, but they never found that person that we described it in those woods. I have no idea why he was doing this or why he was acting weird. But to be honest, and to this man, I don't even want to know what you had plans to do. Let's not meet. When I was a little girl, I must have been maybe 5 years old, and my teacher took us as in kindergarten to what seemed to be a nice little national park. It wasn't really like a big national park up north. It was just a park that had at least a pretty good sighting. It was in the forest, and of course we had some outhouses there, such as a little lake and even picnic tables. We were having a picnic at the time, and I was pretty young. Although I am 5 years old, was 5 at the time, I can't recall everything, but I will try the best I can to recreate this. When I was really young, I liked to go on picnics. It was before I had, the internet net. Well, of course we did, but that was like before I started using YouTube, Facebook, and all that. As a kid, I loved going on picnics with my family and friends. Sometimes I would go with my friend and his or her family whenever they do picnics. Sometimes my mom would take me picnics if she had time. Sometimes my dad might join along, but he doesn't really do much at the time. When I was 5, I went to this picnic place that I can't remember the location, but it did have a playground and even had like a lake that we could watch. I was playing by the playset and on the swings when I noticed there was something in the water. I obviously looked over to see that there was a canoe. Of course, very rarely we would find canoes, but I ended up looking over to see that there was someone or a man fishing there. He seemed to be quite interesting, as I really wanted to do fishing someday too. As I got a little closer by the lake, although the teachers were getting everything ready for the picnic, I looked over to see that someone or something was just staring out of the blue. I couldn't really tell what it was, but one of the teachers that was supervising was taking some students on canoes. So I was one of them that got on the canoe, and we kayaked and canoed certain places. There was other people that did kayaking at the area, so it was a pretty popular place for it. As we got closer, we saw that the man was looking down, as he was looking for something. I tried to wave to him to get him my attention, but he didn't look up. Instead, he just looked down. I was confused as to why he was looking down, so I tried to get him his attention again. But this time he did nothing. He just stared down. As my teacher got closer to see if he was okay, she tapped the side of what seemed to be the canoe, tried to get the man's attention. The man didn't move. Of course, we tried doing it again, but this time he didn't move. But then when she looked over, she could see that there was someone in the forest. She really couldn't tell entirely who it was, so she assumed that maybe it might have been a hiker. But when she tried to tap the side of the boat again, this time, whatever it was fell onto the water and the canoe capsized. The teacher got to look to see that it was a doll, or a dummy that looked almost realistic to a human. We looked over, but we couldn't see anybody who might have placed it. So we went straight back to the campsite, and I don't remember what happened after that. I have no idea if that little fake doll that was on the lake at the canoe where it was to try to get people's attention or lure somebody into danger. But regardless, I don't know what became of it, and my teachers have reported it to the authorities, but they were not able to find out the mystery of who placed that fake man on the canoe in the middle of what seemed to be a little lake. In 2016, I was with my friend, which we'll call her Deanna for the sake of this story. Deanna and I were walking through the backs of what seemed to be like a little park. The park we were at was near a forest, which went on for a few miles. Now, the park was pretty huge, as it does have some gardens that people like to walk through. But of course, me and Deanna decided to go for a hike in the woods that was not far from the park. We went on a day when there was no school, and it was close to summertime, so me and Deanna decided to walk through the woods. Of course, it did rain the day before, so some of the stuff was just a little wet. While we were walking through the forest, we saw what seemed to be a picnic table, and we decided to eat what seemed to be our lunch there. We decided to have a little picnic, even though it was a little wet, and the table was a bit wet too, but luckily we had brought what seemed to be a basket full of stuff, such as some snacks. We even put a blanket out to at least so we can be, dry. As we were munching on some sandwiches and drinking sodas, I heard what seemed to be a child crying. Deanna looked around, and she was confused as to why we were hearing a child cry. We called out to the child if she or he was there, but there was no response. We realized that the crying of the child sounded like it came from deep in the woods. We looked over to see that the crying was coming from the direction that was the opposite of where we were. The other direction, which was the opposite direction of where we came, that was where the crying was coming from. We took for a walk in the woods, and the crying got louder, and it sounded like it was a little girl, no older than 7. Now, we called out to the little girl, saying that if she's lost to come to us and that we would help her find her way home. But as we called out to her, before we got any further in the woods, Deanna stopped me and said something that I really was a little startled and freaked out about. The crying was on a loop. There was no child crying in the woods, so Deanna and I packed up our picnic and we went back out of the forest and went back to the park. We continued to eat at the park, but after that we went to report it to the police of what we heard. But I don't know what became of it, as this still confuses me to this day. But I don't know who or what was luring us into those woods, but I really don't want to find out. In the winter of 2017, something really freaky happened, and it was around before Christmas. It was shortly before Christmas, and I was going for a walk in the forest. As, after I was done with Christmas shopping, I just wanted some time to myself. I I was let off of school one day as there would be short classes, and since they were not going to do much, I decided to take that day off from school just to go and do my usual thing. Now, I was walking through the woods in the wintertime as snow was on the ground, and it was snowing lightly, so I didn't have to worry about walking in the snowstorm. When I got home, I decided to go and do a walk in the woods, which, of course, I was home from going to the convenience store to pick up something for my mom. I walked through the forest, and I really enjoyed the beauty of nature. It was the snow, the feel, and everything about it, especially when it close to wintertime, and even during Christmas. It was just amazing. I was walking down the forest, minding my own business, checking my phone just to make sure if anyone texts or calls me, although there would be barely any signal in the woods. I looked over to see that there was someone or something howling in the woods. I thought that it might have been a coyote or maybe a wolf in the woods, but I couldn't see anything. Even though it was snowing, it wasn't heavy snowing, but I could not see very well as it was kind of foggy around the area. I called out to see if anyone was there, but then I looked over to see that there was some antlers. Looked like a deer, and I was going over to see if it was really a deer. But when I got closer, maybe at least 10 feet away from it, it suddenly looked at me. It had what seemed to be a skull-like deer head, and it seemed to be very territorial. I wasn't really sure what it was, if this was just some prank, but it stand up on its hind legs and let out what seemed to be a screeching sound. It turned around and ran off in the other direction, disappearing back into the woods with the snow. I had no idea what the hell that thing was. I ended up going back to my house and not even speaking about it. My parents asked me if I was okay, but I said I was fine and didn't tell them this story, thinking that they think I might have just imagining things or making things up. But I didn't even think of this. I still don't even know what this creature really was, but if I had to say if it was a Wendigo, that would have been creepy, as I still have no idea to this day if it's still out there. But when I went back in the woods the day after, I had not saw it since, and I think this is a good thing that I have not seen it. I don't even know what it was going to do to me, but whatever the possibilities were, it cannot be good.